Climate Asia is a social enterprise dedicated to strengthening the climate ecosystem in Asia through the capacity building of organizations, focusing on human resources, organizational development, and thought leadership. Climate change is going to cause a massive shift in the fundamental functioning of several industries. Climate Asia is a new initiative bridging the gap by working with direct and indirect climate actors and organizations across the spectrum in various sectors. We will accomplish this through strategic HR/OD support, a digital platform to address HR needs, information dissemination related to climate funding, events and news, and thought leadership in the form of convenings, conferences, panel discussions, and dialogue building. Climate Asia endeavors to create conversations around the three pillars: share, empower, and connect, by increasing awareness, upskilling ecosystem, and catalyzing networking among players within and outside the industry. We will work with climate organizations to strengthen the climate workforce to build a robust climate ecosystem in Asia. We have launched the Conversation of Change, a video interview series centered around one of the most pertinent crises of our time, climate change. Conversation of Change attempts to synthesize perspectives around climate action, skills, talent, and journey of various climate leaders and their role in the climate ecosystem. With this, we begin by welcoming our speaker, Vaibhav Chaturvedi. Vaibhav is an economist who leads the Council's work on low carbon pathways. His research focuses on energy and climate change mitigation policy issues, especially those impacting India within the integrated assessment modeling framework of the Global Change Assessment Model. Vaibhav's recent work includes studies on pathways and policies for achieving India's nationally determined contributions and mid-century strategies within the context of sustainable development and national priorities. The climate policy energy water nexus, transportation energy and emission scenarios, HFC emission scenarios, and mitigation policy and nuclear energy scenarios for India. Prior to joining the Council, he was a postdoctoral research associate at the Joint Global Change Research Institute, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, USA. He has been actively involved in global model comparison exercises like the Asian Modeling Exercise and the Energy Modeling Forum. Vaibhav has been part of Government of India committees on energy and climate policy. He actively publishes in and reviews articles for leading international energy and climate policy journals. He holds a doctorate in economics from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and a master's degree in forest management from the Indian Institute of Forest Management, Bhopal. We welcome you, Vaibhav. Thanks for joining this conversation.
Great. Thank you, Purnima, for inviting me. Very happy to be part of this conversation.
Thanks. With that, we begin with the first question of the day. Could you describe the work done at Council on Energy, Environment and Water and what your role as the fellow looks like?
Okay, so CEEW is one of Asia's leading policy research institutions. They're essentially a think tank. What does think tank mean? It means, we do a lot of research, which is based on data, both qualitative and quantitative, primary or secondary. Essentially, we do research. And on the basis of research, then we engage with the government. So we essentially try to inform, policy making process in the domain of energy and climate through our research work. And the process of research is, of course, this is a high level analytical kind of work, but we also have to engage, with the stakeholders in a very deep way. And that's absolutely important because for a think tank, we are not, we're not like an academic institution, like not a university, right? So it's not that we just do a research, we publish it in let's say top journals, but we don't talk to people. That is like that is not the way we do. We think talking to people, talking to experts, all the stakeholders in the domain is extremely important. So we do this, all the data analysis and all the research work, but we also, based on the research, we also take information from the people who we engage with. And then based on all of this kind of synthesis, we recommend certain policy actions and we do inform government policy making. So that's what broadly CEW does, and we work across many different areas of work. Essentially, we work on energy access. So energy access means, thinking about the state of affairs on things like electricity access and usage, LPG access and usage. And we do, India's largest surveys across 8,000 plus households across 8 states in India, the low energy access kind of states, to just better understand how situation is improving on the ground. Then we work a lot on renewable energy, be it solar rooftop or, grid connected kind of big utility scale power plants of solar, wind, bioenergy, all that kind of work. Power sector is extremely important for us, and we are working in a big way in UP, and so we have a Lucknow office also along with Delhi, where we focus a lot on the power sector reforms, especially focusing on the UP distribution companies and electricity sector, but across many states also. Then industrial sustainability and competitiveness, where we look at the industrial sector sustainability and the issues around, things like, the impact of carbon tax, impact of sustainability policy, the national hydrogen mission, carbon capture and storage. So all the issues which are extremely important for the decarbonization of the industrial sector. We have a team dedicated for that. Then we look at technology, finance and trade, things like, hydrofluorocarbons, the cooling needs across, states in India and like at the national level, geoengineering governance, trade, green trade, and what is the implication of the newly emerging geopolitics or the climate debate on the traditional trade structures, that all that kind of work. Then risk and adaptation is one big area where we look at air pollution. We are one of the premier organizations in working on air pollution, on climate risk. That is another big area for us. Water. So all of these we look at through a climate risk and adaptation lens. We have a dedicated center for energy finance, where we track, all the debate around climate finance, all the data analysis and debate around it. Mobility is another area of work for us. As you would know, EVs are a very important part of the debate. So we do work across many different areas of work, and I lead something called the low carbon pathways work, essentially where we look at longer term scenarios. So where we try to integrate information across many different sectors, what you talked about, and try to see, okay, what is the implication for the current information and how trends are evolving for, let's say, 30, 40, 50 years in the future, right? So that's what the team I lead. So looking at using some sort of economic modeling frameworks and looking at 30, 40, 50 years from now, trying to understand the implications of the trends. And then if we don't like the direction in which you're moving, right, then we say, okay, what do we need to do now, in the near term to change the direction in which you're moving, right? So that's the work on low carbon pathways and modeling that I lead at CEEW. Yeah, so that's a bit about CEEW.
Thank you, Vaibhav, for sharing the incredible work that you and CEEW has been doing. With that, I would like to move on to the second question. As someone with around 13 plus years of experience, who has worked as a research fellow in the field of energy and climate policy, and leading the organization's low carbon pathways, as you rightly mentioned, how would you describe your career journey into this space? And what were your key learnings? If you could just let us know what the key learnings were and how different is everyday now compared to when you first started working in watershed management in the arid state of Gujarat.
Yeah, so the career has meandered through many very interesting turns and twists. So you're right, I started with like irrigation management and watershed management, and that was a field-based job, right? So that was also research, but very different kind of research. So this was more like survey kind of research. You go and talk to farmers, try to understand the challenges they are facing, and then think about what kind of interventions that need to be designed and what kind of policies need to be thought about, right? So, but essentially, not a core implementation job, but research which was kind of very, very close to the implementation, because I was working in an implementation organization. So it was not a research organization, it was the research unit of an implementation organization, right? Then from there, I moved on to a PhD, which was about, climate stuff. So, all the climate modeling, carbon trading, carbon markets, that kind of work, so academic work. And then I worked for an US national laboratory, Pacific Northwest National Lab, and the Joint Global Change Research Institute, where I also worked on the modeling stuff, better understood their skills. And then I joined CEEW. So broadly speaking, I was earlier in implementation, and from there I moved on to kind of very hardcore analytical research, very cutting edge analytical research on the climate stuff. right? So what was very interesting for me, that even when I moved, academic research could be, many people say, ivory tower research kind of thing, right? You could sit in this, and you could analyze data and you could write in journals. So that is one circle that many academicians follow. And when I was in the US, at least my job was like that. So it was pure research. And then, of course, the many seniors in the organization used to engage very closely and heavily with the governments, right? But of course, I was a young researcher. My job was just pure research, so to speak, right? But what was very clear to me, that talking to the government, getting their perspectives, understanding where they are coming from, because we used to have all these conversations with our, like senior leadership in US also. So it was very clear, that the government perspective, how they are thinking about things, and was very important. Equally important is how other stakeholders, like especially industry people, are thinking about. They are the ones who are putting money on the table, and then other influencers in the civil society, and what they're talking about, and people on ground, like consumers like you and me, those kinds of things, and other actors like distribution companies and all. So one core learning has been on the academic front, which means how to do modeling. That's a very academic learning. How do you do economic modeling or long-term integrated assessment modeling, whatever. That's something very technical kind of. So that skill, so that is a technical skill. The other learning has been that, well, talking to people is absolutely important. And just because we do this, high-level cutting-edge modeling does not mean much if we are far from the reality, right? That's why our work, in CEEW also, we engage very closely with all the teams, because all the teams have their, like, other teams of CEEW has their ears on the ground, so to speak, because they engage very closely with the stakeholders, right? And we also do directly, but we also engage with them very closely, so as to just understand the realities on the ground. And our research should be very contextual in nature. It should be very, very policy relevant. So that's my biggest learning, that your research, one is the technical skill you have learned, that is very important. But if you don't have a sense of the current state of things, and what is the thinking of the people and the decision makers, then all your research, whatever high funded research you might do, it is maybe not really the most useful research. We want to understand research is extremely useful and it's applied in nature, right? And that has been the driving force. We have to see some impact on ground, be it our across CEEW, that you will see that kind of that thread. It has to have some impact at the end of the day on policy level and how people behave and all that. So that's what we have been following throughout. Yeah.
Thank you, Vaibhav, for sharing your key learnings and your very interesting journey. With that, I have another question. So when it comes to your expertise areas of work, like modeling exercises, low carbon pathways, energy, and climate change mitigation policy issues, how do you attract talent, and what are the essential skill sets required to be working in these areas?
Yeah. So, we are a research organization. So the core skills we do need are research skills. And the second set of skills that we do want is also engagement skills, right? Because as I said, engagement is extremely important. Engaging with government is one thing. There might be very senior people, but even engaging with people like, let's say, farmers. So it depends on what exactly domain we are looking for in terms of hiring. If we are hiring for, let's say, a livelihood or powering livelihood program, which is one of our flagship programs, then we are looking for, that kind of domain expertise, so to speak, where a person has to go to the farmers and talk to like people living in the rural areas, and survey and all that. So it's a different skill set, right? And then versus when I am hiring for the, let's say, the low carbon pathways team, where modeling becomes important, so you need to be looking at quantitative understanding of things. People should be comfortable with numbers, because numbers and some analysis, data analysis and all that. So essentially you are looking for, as I said, two things: research skills, how people understand the research process, the high level storyline, and all those kinds of things, plus some engagement level and some managerial expertise. Depends on what level you are hiring. So what you're looking for in, let's say, entry level research is very different from what you're looking at in a, like a senior researcher or a mid-senior researcher. So that's what the thing is. Another thing very important is writing skills, because research is a lot about writing, not just technical research reports, but also things like opinion pieces, blogs, and all that. So you have to socialize the research, that it has to generate some dialogue, some impact, and all that kind of thing. So writing is very, very important. And that is also a skill we explicitly test. So basically data analysis skills, writing skills, engagement skills. We also look for things like initiative. For CW, it's very, very important. Leadership by initiative. So we look for, initiative that like people who can take initiative, who kind of dream big. And we are creating an infrastructure for them to grow in the organization, right? So we are creating that. And in CW, in fact, even a research analyst can lead research projects. It is true. The research analyst, like you would have entered just 1 year into the job and you are leading a project that you would not find it anywhere, right? So of course we have this like support system, monitoring and system, so that everything is on track. And it's not that anybody who comes with an idea is given that charge. We have to vet things. That person should have managerial expertise and demonstrate ability to deliver on those kinds of things. But people are doing it here. So basically we do give, if we find everything in order, we do give that kind of opportunity. So looking at initiative, leadership skills is all that we try to test for, in our assessment.
Thank you, Vaibhav. That's very helpful. Thank you for throwing light on such important points. And again, I have another question in follow-up with this. So what advice would you give to a senior and a mid-level professional transitioning into this space? And one piece of advice to a student who wants to work in the climate sector?
Okay. See, when you are saying senior transitioning into this space, means the senior is working somewhere else, right? So, and many people are like that. Many people want, like, having worked for like 15 years, 10 years, 20 years, want to move to the sustainability sector or the climate sector, so to speak. Right. The first thing is, these people already bring a lot of managerial expertise, which is great, right? So what they do need to know is just have a good or rather great domain understanding, right? So the question is, how do you develop that domain understanding, right? So either in your current job, which is a very different sector, let's say IT sector, but you keep on reading materials. So reading is extremely important. You keep on reading, you keep on basically you understand the debate, you read everything that comes to it, right? So that is very important, because when you enter a sector, you should understand the debate. No senior will come in a senior research position, because first of all, you don't know the domain and you don't know the research skills, right? So anybody who's senior has to understand the domain and has to understand, some sense of how research should be done, right? So because senior position will not like to start at an entry level, right? So they would come in at a, let's say, a mid-senior level where they will need to deliver. And if they are the ones who are in charge of things, they will need to understand the domain also. They will need to understand like the process of research, and will need to ensure that the team they have delivers on it. But they are the ones accountable and responsible, right? So they will need to know all of these things, for somebody who's a student, I think building a skill set is very, very important. So you have to think whether you are interested in qualitative, and I'm not even talking about domain interest. Domain interest, you can always experiment and find out. But in terms of cross-cutting skills, or an interest, some people are interested in heavy quantitative analysis, some are interested in qualitative analysis, some are not really interested in research at all. They just want to go to the field, engage with people on the field and create things, that kind of thing, So depending on what your interest is, you develop your skill sets, and you should definitely try to be very, very good at least what. So whenever let's say if I ask somebody, what is the value you bring? The answer should be a very solid answer with backed by evidence. People can say many things they want. When you do cross questioning and you do follow up, people will say, I'm very interested in quantitative analysis. And we will say, okay, tell us what you know. And you say, that person have not really done anything. Just beyond taking an elective course in regression, they have not done anything. It's very clear, it's very clear for us, somebody who has worked on something in a deeper way and somebody who has just done a check box, that the difference is very, very apparent, right? So students should know that anybody who is kind of hiring and interviewing, they've got some experience, very next to impossible to be kind of fooling them, right? The difference is very, very clear in terms of people who actually made an effort. So that is very important. Make an effort in whatever value you think you bring to the table. Be clear about the value. Just think about, you have to convince somebody that, okay, this is the value I'm going to bring to your organization and your team. And then you should have some things to back it up, right? So just ensure that you have things to back it up and are able to demonstrate that very clearly during the discussion/interview process.
That's some very wonderful points, Vaibhav. I agree with you. I mean, to have a domain understanding and to keep reading about the sector is very important. Thanks for sharing that. Uh, okay, with that, I would like to move on to the next question. So your research also focuses on integrated assessment models that are built on an oversimplified logic that people are rational optimizers of scarce resources. In reality, human choice is a darker blue of misperception and missed opportunity, constrained by others' decisions. As someone who has been a part of various GOI committees and groups on India's energy and climate policy, could you describe the overlap of climate policy and behavioral policy in the present day?
Yeah. So I mean, let me say this: any model or any particular research is not like it gives answers to all the questions. It is never the case, and we don't even claim it, right? So our job is that one particular perspective that we are analyzing things from, our analysis is solid from that perspective, right? And it is very clear to us also, to policymakers also, that the real policy recommendations will have to be based on some such hard economic quantitative analysis, also maybe some analysis on political economy, and then analysis on behavioral side of things, and then maybe on institutional side of things. So there is a bunch of different dimensions, and the real decision making that happens, at least in the policy domain, like climate and policy domain, and any other policy domain, I believe, is a mix of all of these, right? So it has to have the points of view of economics very clearly, like how people behave, how investors behave, those kinds of things, right? That is economics. That's what we try to do through, when you say integrated assessment modeling, that's what we try to do, how policymakers behave, all of these people, right? So that is one dimension from the economic point of view. Then there is a political economy, like which is essentially about, maybe things like power, how, power between an industrialist and a labor, coal labor, the unions, the bureaucracy, international geopolitics, all those kinds of things. And then, of course, the behavioral aspect. The behavioral aspect could also be economics. So it could be behavioral economics, but it's the same thing, right? I mean, that's a separate. So behavior is very important. Institutional, thinking about institutions. So all those things are ultimately kind of going to be very important. So I don't think anybody should claim that their research touches upon everything. If you want to do a very good job and go in deeper way, you have to focus on one thing. But what is very important at the institutional level, we look at many things, right? So when we are talking about the climate debate and story, I am the one leading the maybe economics part of it, like I'm like integrated assessment modeling, but people, they are working with all the stakeholders on the ground, like power sector reforms, what I talked about. We are engaging with the distribution companies to understand these issues of like the nuts and bolts, the operational aspects, which is about behavior you talked about, right? And which is about better understanding the dynamics between different actors, the incentive structure, the political economy, the strength of institutions. So all the other teams actually work on all the other aspects. And collectively, when we talk to each other, there is a robust process within the institution that we are talking to each other. And so there is a reason why we are one of the top climate related think tanks, because we have all these internal processes, and process is very important. So research, I mean, it's not just about me as an individual doing great research. That might be the case, but I mean, an institution is not about the individual, right? So it is about the internal processes. The internal processes have to be very strong, especially the research processes, right? So we have very robust and strong research processes where we ensure that it's not just that I do an analysis and nobody knows about it and I just publish because I am like the superstar of my area. It is not like that. Nobody is a superstar, right? Every research piece of mine has to go through that review process and internal kind of dialogue and debate where people will question me. And if I don't make sense, I will have to change my things, as simple as that. And because these people are working very closely on all the other aspects that you're talking about, the behavioral aspect, the operational nuts and bolts, many, many things. And only after incorporating all that kind of, rich information, perspectives, then one research will be published and socialized. And we are also much more confident. Once you do internal, all of this process, you follow it, you are very confident when you go out and start engaging with the larger set of stakeholders, because you have already done your homework in a very robust way. It's very important that research institutions have that kind of very robust internal processes that we need to follow, and we do have all those processes in place and we follow it up.
Right. Thank you, Vaibhav, for sharing such insights. I quite like the point where you said that institution is not about individuals, but about internal processes. With that, I would like to move on to the next question. So the Union Cabinet chaired by Prime Minister Narendra Modi approved India's updated NDC on August 3. As per this announcement, India will now reduce the emissions intensity of its GDP by 45% by 2030. Which is higher than the 33 to 35% range mentioned in the first NDC from 2005 levels. What do you think why do you think this change was necessary for India's aspirations in the future?
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially, we're talking about the government policy, right? And the government policy making process, I mean, one is instruments, okay? And the second is targets. So the role of targets is extremely important because they are essentially policy signals, right? So when the government takes certain targets, and it is a credible target, so credibility of the target is very, very important, right? So if the target is perceived as credible by the market, then the market will move in that direction, right? So basically what we are saying is, let's say if the target was not there in the place, right? So in absence of the target, obviously markets will function, right? But markets will, do whatever they want, so to speak, wherever they are getting best returns, wherever they think, the future is going and all that. That's where investments will start happening. So the role of policymakers is absolutely critical to show direction, right? Because markets can deliver us unsustainable outcomes from the environmental point of view, right? And if environment is very important, and at least, I mean, that's what we expect the government to ensure that environment is an externality, markets will not think about it. So it's a role of the government to kind of save the environment, so to speak, right? Or protect the environment, right? So these sort of policy targets are, very important because the government gives a market signal. Okay, I have set this target. And now because the government has said this simply means, well, it will find ways or instruments to ensure that the markets move in that direction. And automatically when this kind of thing happens, the market participants, especially investors and all, take that message, right? And they already started changing this, right? So basically the assumption is, if I don't change the way I'm operating, then the government will come hard on me through some instrument, command and control instrument, economic instrument, whatever it is. It will come hard on me and it will ensure that I meet government targets. So I better start preparing myself in advance, right? So that's how this whole process. So there is a role of policy and then the role of markets, and policy kind of has a role to guide markets in the desirable direction, right? So all these updated NDCs and all that you're talking about, essentially that's what they are. In 2015, we had a particular target. Now we had a great progress because of all the policies that the government, especially on the solar front, kind of adopted. And now when we look at back, and NDCs, every country or every party is supposed to submit NDCs every 5 years. So we were supposed to submit in 2020, but the pandemic happened. Many countries were, of course, very different scenario. But now every 5 years, every country is expected to submit. So in 2025 also, we're expected to submit another update NDC. And 2030 also, right? Basically, every 5 years, we will have a look back and we will say, okay, let's look at the progress, what has happened and all. And then on the back of that, we announce our next update. Something like that, right? So again, these updates are very important because they do some sort of synthesis of what has happened in the last 5 years. And then say, okay, now I know a new information has come in, technologies have grown. So can I really up my target? Can I be more ambitious, right? So the government has said, well, I definitely can be more ambitious, right? And I also want to emphasize that I've emphasized this many times now in many different forums, that the global growth scenario is now emerging in a very different direction. There are already recessionary concerns. There is going to be impact on GDP. There's high inflation. Interest rates are being raised everywhere, including in India. All of these collectively do have a very obvious growth impact, right? So when your growth is hit, especially for a developing economy, the fiscal space that you've got, of course, that gets constrained. Also, I mean, growth simply means you are going to have more demand of electricity, right? So the room for things like higher additions of solars is a higher room because you've got a higher growth that has ended up happening. Now, in this new scenario, all those things are going to be hit. That is very clear. The extent of the hit. Now, it does not mean India will start like decelerating. India is going to be a growing economy and I think in all probability, the fastest growing economy of the world. but lesser growth than what was expected because of this new scenario that is emerging, right? So which means lesser demand for electricity, lesser room for solar additions and all that. So those are some big concerns that are emerging. Given those concerns, the NDC is actually very ambitious, the updates, because of these new concerns that are emerging. So that's what I will say. The role of these policy targets are absolutely important, because the moment they are credible policy targets, they give a very strong sense of directions to the markets, right? And that's what needs to happen. Ultimately, investments will happen at the market level. You know, government can always do some instrument, some budgetary support here and there. So the big investments are going to be delivered only by markets, and the government has to work in tandem with the private sector and the markets to ensure, you know, that they move in this direction, desirable direction, which is the policy targets and all.
Right. Thank you, Weber, for sharing such insights about the role of policymakers and also about NDCs. And with that, I have a follow-up question. So what is the feasibility of India's sectoral transitions towards a net zero future as compared to the rest of the world?
Yeah. So when we decided, the Prime Minister announced our net zero 2070, I mean, some analysis, actually CEEW was the one that published analysis when we looked at alternative years, right? So we looked at 2050, 2060, 2070, and 2080 net zero possibilities, right? And this was a modeling kind of work I talked about. And then we said, okay, which one of these is more feasible? And we had a bunch of different kind of rational criteria, many things. I would not go into the technical details of it. But my larger point is we already have looked at many things. And because this was always an open question, right? That what should the government of India choose? So only after looking at certain underlying variables like economic growth, for example, what, you know, technology transitions could be possible, you know, in both pessimistic scenario, optimistic scenario, right? Those kinds of things we look at it, and sectoral transition possibilities, feasibility of sectoral transitions, you know, the 2070 target was informed. See, ultimately, we should know that all of these are calls at the highest, like decision made at the highest level. It's not that any one research agency does a research and the government accepts it, right? All of these are ultimately political calls. Our job as research organizations is to ensure that these sort of extremely important decisions are backed by information and good analysis. That's what we can do. That's our job, so to speak, in the larger policy spectrum, right? So we have ensured that we have provided information, robust, reliable information for helping that decision making. Ultimately, that decision has been, of course, been taken at the highest level based on a lot of information that is available. Including CEEW, others would have done some analysis. So now, once this information kind of has been taken, it is already, considering I would say what we have been saying, that this is ambitious, but yet realistic, right? So it is definitely not something that we are going to achieve in the business as usual. So in absence of this target, we would have definitely not achieved even peaking of India's emissions by 2070. India is a fast growing economy. There is no reason why it would even peak in absence of a very strong climate policy. What the Prime Minister did was put this 2070 net zero target up in front. Even in the updated NDC, in the first two lines, if you say it very clearly states, all the updated NDCs are in the direction of achieving the 2070 net zero target. So the target is on the table now, which is great. And of course, this is also a bet. We are always taking a bet on the future. And the assumption is that, 2030 updated NDC is only one step. Steps will come in, every 10 years, 15 years, new and more kind of strong steps will come in. For example, the emission trading scheme is the announcement of the bill that will hopefully lead to the creation of an carbon emission trading scheme at the national level in India is a very, very important. It's again a path-breaking announcement, because the first time the government has said that it will start pricing carbon. It has never happened till now. It will start pricing carbon. Now that's another very important signal. And the market now knows that if the bill is kind of passed and accepted, this is what the state of affairs is going to be. Carbon will be priced. Now they will already start doing things to be better prepared in that direction, right? So there are many very, very important interventions that the government is already thinking about. So 2070 kind of targets, they have to be made feasible. See, if you ask me how feasible these are, they're not feasible at all, I would say. It is too ambitious. the only way to make it feasible is to undertake these kinds of actions which the government is taking. Undertake these actions to ensure that these become feasible, because otherwise none of this is actually very, very ambitious for Indian economy. So it has to be made feasible. And the government has very clearly shown intent, very clearly, based on bold announcement, as well as these sort of practical steps like updated NDCs, the carbon market. It is serious about getting into that direction, something like that. So yeah, so I think it has to be made feasible.
Yes, very, very rightly said, Vaibhav, and I quite agree with you on that. Thank you for sharing these very relevant points. With that, I would like to move on to the last question of this conversation. How do you define work-life balance, and what activities would you recommend that help you disconnect from your everyday responsibilities?
Yeah, I mean, I think every person would have their own answer to this question. So, I mean, I might be very well placed in answering technical questions on skill set and all those kinds of things. Work-life balance, I think, is everybody's own thing. Some people just want to work for 8 hours and all. Some people will say, I'll work like crazy till like 45 years of my life, and then I'll retire at 45. Now that is their notion of work-life balance, right? So I don't think there is one definition, and I don't even think my definition of work-life balance would kind of fit with anybody. It should not be guiding anybody else. I just want to say this: you should be comfortable in whatever you do, and that's how I'll put it. If somebody is comfortable with working 14 hours a day, and that person has found a way to not being burnt out, not feeling distressed and all, that's very important. And that's what I'm saying. Whatever mode of work you choose, you have to ensure one thing, that you don't get stressed out. Now, some people might get stressed out in 9 hours of work. Some people might not be stressed out in 14 hours of work for like 20 years. So everybody will have a different reaction. So, just ensure that you don't feel burnt out, stressed out. And if you do, do take a break, talk to your, bosses, do take regular leaves to ensure you don't get kind of burnt out. Those are simple things, but ultimately you are the only one who can listen to your own self, Nobody else will understand or understand. You have to understand yourself, and you have to then put your point across, and you have to ensure that you have a reasonable and good work-life balance, whichever way you define it for your own self, right? But definitely ensure that is the case, whichever way you think. Yeah.